The 1930s were a tough time in the United States for pretty much everyone, but it was especially tough for the people in the Midwest and parts of the South. Because of the way people had been farming, the land had an abundance of dust and dirt, and that dirt was being pushed into the air. The conditions were so bad that thousands of people had to leave their farms and move elsewhere. But many of them went to California. These people were known as Oakies. Today, we're going to be discussing my favorite Kristin Hannah book, The Four Winds. We will look at the plot, characters, and themes of this novel. So let's dive in. This book begins in the 1920s with Elsa Walcott, a plain young woman who was the daughter of a rich local merchant. Elsa is not a big fan of people, but like Belle, she is a big fan of books. She knows the librarian and a few other people in town, but she's mostly sheltered. Until one day she buys a red dress and she goes out on the town. It's there that she meets Rafe Martinelli and she falls in love and unfortunately becomes pregnant. Disgraced, her father kicks her out and she's taken in by the Martinellis. However, Elsa, once she picks up the ropes, feels more at home with them than she ever did in her own home. Elsa and Rafe couldn't be more opposite. Rafe has his head in the clouds, a trait he passed on to his daughter, and Elsa loves to work. She found joy in doing chores and in her garden. Already unhappy, Rafe, like many men of the time, finds himself adrift during the Dust Bowl. He leaves the farm and never comes back, leaving Elsa with her two young children and Rafe's older parents. As things go from bad to worse, Elsa's son, Anthony, develops a lung condition, and the doctor says he has to leave if he ever has a chance of living a normal life. So Elsa, her daughter Loretta, and her son Ant leave their home in Texas and travel to California. Elsa and Loretta butt heads throughout this trip because Loretta blames Elsa for their father leaving. However, the two of them draw close together during their hardships in California. California is not easy for the Martinelli family, not easy at all. The family find themselves in a migrant camp where they live out of their truck and work with the other families to survive. Elsa gets a job picking cotton on a field where she gets paid enough for them to survive. She also works in people's homes. However, the people of California treat the Oakies as second rate citizens. Elsa has to fight for her kids to get educated and treated with respect. Elsa finds work on a plantation where the people who work there basically become indentured servants. They have to pay for everything their house, their food, and anything they might need on credit. This is something I never realized was happening during this time period. The greed of some people is never ending. At this point, Loretta becomes interested in a communist sect and starts going to meetings in secret. Elsa finds out where she's been going, and she is then saved by one of the leaders of this communist group, Jack. Jack and Elsa become close, and he gives her the strength to protest their working conditions. The protest is the end of Elsa as she's shot, leaving her children orphans. Loretta robs the plantation which they'd been working on and is able to get her and Anthony back home. In the resolution, things are getting back to normal. The Dust Bowl is ending as farmers use new techniques to save their farms. Aunt is working on the farm, and Loretta is going to college. She keeps in touch with Jack, and they end by writing about her mother. It almost makes it seem like Loretta was the one who wrote this whole novel in the end, which I think is a great way to end the novel. So let's talk about characters. Elsa was such an amazing character. probably one of my favorite characters in Kristin Hannah's books. Her strength and insecurities are so realistic and well written. She is a woman who was never really loved. Her father loved her conditionally, and her mother wasn't very kind to her either. Then she met Rafe, but they were only married because of her pregnancy. And although the two of them cared about each other, it wasn't really love. So Elsa didn't see herself as beautiful, but plain and unlovable. Here's a quote that shows this. Although she hadn't seen her parents for years, it turned out a parent's disapproval was a powerful, lingering voice that shaped and defined one's self image. Here's another quote. Heartache had been a part of her life so long it had become as familiar as the color of her hair or the slight curve of her spine. Sometimes it was the lens through which she viewed her world, and sometimes it was the blindfold she wore so she didn't see, but it was always there. The pain of seeing herself this way is so clear, yet she's so strong. Not only does she work hard, she provides a way for her family to survive during one of the toughest times in American history. Elsa's character grows from a quiet woman who didn't trust herself to a warrior. Here's a quote that shows this. Jack says that I'm a warrior, and while I don't believe it, I know this. A warrior believes in an end she can't see and fights for it. A warrior never gives up. A warrior fights for those weaker than herself. It sounded like motherhood to me. End quote. By the end of the novel, Elsa was not afraid to stand up for herself and her family. For the first time in her life, she saw herself as everyone else did. I was absolutely devastated when Elsa is shot at the end of this book. It is sad because she truly seemed happy for the first time in her life, and then it's all taken away. However, that's how Kristin Hannah is. She's an author who's not afraid of taking out her main characters, which is a bold move for most authors. Loretta was so well written. At the beginning of the book, I was annoyed with her. She was being, well, a teenager, but she was so realistic. Her pain and the way she handles her father leaving was very authentic and relatable. As a young woman, I remember having irrational yet passionate arguments with my mom also. However, as Loretta grows, she grows to love her mother. She recognizes her hard work and seeks to help her mother have a better life. Loretta getting pulled into the communist group was an interesting addition to the novel. It allowed us to see that communists were not truly scary people working for Russia, but groups of people who wanted everyone to be treated fairly. This is not something we see from literature of the time, but it was an interesting perspective which helped us to understand what the communist movement in the US looked like before it was shut down by McCarthyism. These communists were just looking out for the people who had been displaced by tragedy. They were lobbying the government to help Americans who were just down on their luck. It was actually probably dangerous for Jack to be a communist at the time, but that doesn't seem to scare him. Jack's main concern is the people, which is just very genuine. But before we talk about Jack, let's talk about Rafe. Rafe and Loretta were two peas in a pod. Rafe seems like someone who struggled with his mental health before mental health was really a subject. Sure, he did what was right for Elsa, but he always dreamed of more, and his dreams led him, like many others, to the bar. Rafe's addiction was just a sign of his poor mental health and his inability to deal with the life and how it was handed to him. He was the opposite of Elsa, who thrived on the farm and loved being needed for the first time in her life. It's not surprising that the two of them fell in love in the first place. At the beginning of the novel, Elsa is a dreamer. She lived mostly in her books, and since she wasn't able to live a life of her own, she was able to feed Rafe's dreams, and the two of them were happy with each other when they were young. But it's clear that this relationship would not work long term. They say the opposites attract, But Rafe and Elsa didn't want the same things out of life. Rafe wanted fame and Elsa wanted stability. When Rafe leaves, it hurts Elsa, but I don't think she was surprised. The Dust Bowl was just an excuse for him. However, it devastated Loretta. Elsa made herself out to be the bad guy so that Loretta was able to process this loss without internalizing it. It was Rafe's leaving that made Loretta and Elsa grow closer. And I'll talk more about this later. But I do think that Rafe was an important part of both of these women's growth and development. In contrast to Rafe, we have Jack. Goodness, we love Jack. Although Jack was only in the book for a short amount of time and therefore was a static character, he was influential to Elsa's change in the novel. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Jack was changed by Elsa and Loretta as well. My favorite part about Jack is his ability to understand people. He's one of those people who can read a person just by looking at their face, and he doesn't judge them either. My favorite part of the book was the kindness that was shown from the people in the town or the camp of refugees. Though most people treated Elsa and her children with disdain, there were people that showed genuine kindness to them. There was the woman who gave them free haircuts and clothes, and the librarian who made Loretta feel welcome. Also, the relationships that Elsa forms in the camp with Stella was so heartwarming. The bonds that these women formed during hard times were inspirational to me. I believe that Stella is what keeps Elsa alive and going for all those years. This book taught me so much about the Dust Bowl and the people who had to live through the displacement of the Dust Bowl. It's crazy to me that these people were treated like refugees and treated so poorly. It's a good reminder about how quickly people isolate others and how we quickly form the other. But let's dive into the themes of this novel. The first topic this book covers is identity. It's clear that Elsa has never had unconditional love. I do think that her mother loved her, but no one in her family was very warm. Here's a quote that shows this. There was pain that came in constant disapproval, a sense of having lost something unnamed, unknown. Elsa had survived it by being quiet, by not demanding or seeking attention, by accepting that she was loved but unliked. She was the other in their family, the one that everyone wished was different. This affected the woman that she became. Elsa didn't really have a place until she moved in with the Martinellis and found herself in hard work. She found that it gave her purpose, and she loved the feeling of being needed and useful. However, because of her marriage with Rafe was so sudden, it's clear that he never really loved her. He cared about her. It's not the same as loving. Because of this, Elsa never really feels beautiful. She sees herself as plain. The first time Elsa finds love is when she has Loretta. Here's a quote that shows this. What in the world was more restorative than a child's love? End quote. With Loretta and Anthony, she finds the love she was never able to have. However, throughout the novel, Elsa finds her own voice and eventually finds herself. She, of course, has been an excellent mother, but she signs up to be part of the PTA to be a voice for her children. This act helps her to forge confidence and helps her to see the impact of her voice. Elsa is also able to find herself in the eyes of Jack. Jack sees Elsa not just for the person she is on the outside, but the person she is on the inside. He sees her as strong, beautiful, and for the first time in her life, Elsa is also able to see herself in that way. Loretta is also going through a time in her life where she's trying to find herself. Throughout the novel, she's trying to separate herself from her mother and keeps looking for different ways in which they're different. However, Loretta ultimately finds out the person she wants to be most like is her mother. Loretta, like her father, has always been a dreamer. She wants to be a writer, and she stays consistent in that. Her mother encourages her to keep going to school so that she can be the person she wants to be. Here's a quote about Loretta: a rebel instead of a dreamer. Daddy had given Loretta words. It was actions that mattered. She knew that now, leaving, staying, fighting, or walking away. Here's another quote: you are of me, Loretta, in a way that can never be broken, not by words or anger or actions or time. I love you. Because of her mother and her father, Loretta is able to grow into a strong, level headed young woman who becomes a voice for her mother and the people like her. I love that it feels like Loretta wrote this book, like a tribute. The next topic that is clear in this novel is love. This book has one of my favorite mother daughter relationships, not because it was perfect, but because Hannah was able to capture this relationship between a mother and her teenage daughter so authentically. Mothers and daughters have a complex relationship, especially during the teenage years. Young girls love their mothers, but they're also trying to learn how to be their own independent people. It's clear that Loretta loved her mother, but she didn't see how much she loved her or needed her until she was gone. Here's a quote from Elsa's mother in law about this: know how much it hurts right now, Elsa. You can't unlove someone, even if you want to, even if he breaks your heart. I understand not wanting to wake up. With this life of ours, who could blame you? But your daughter needs you, especially now. She is foolish as her father. This quote largely captures Elsa and Loretta's relationship. They did need each other, but Loretta didn't understand why. From Elsa and Loretta, we learned about mothers and daughters and the importance of unconditional love. Another quote I found about love that was important was this one: she had counted on a lifetime to teach her children what they needed to know, but she didn't have the gift of grace and time. She still hadn't given them what mattered. They were loved, and they knew it. Everything else was decoration. Elsa didn't truly find love in her life until she became a mother. That unconditional love that should come from your parents was something that Elsa had never experienced until she had children of her own. This is why being a mother is such an important part of Elsa's identity. She knew what it was like not to have your parents fight for you, so she fought tooth and nail for her own children. I'm sure this is how many women of that time period felt. They had been trapped in their own marriages, but they were able to find love for the first time with their own children. There is one last quote about love that I found. Love is what remains when everything else is gone. This is what I should have told my children when we left Texas, what I will tell them tonight. Not that they will understand yet. How could they? I'm 40 years old and I just learned this fundamental truth myself. Love, in the best of times, is a dream. In the worst of times, a salvation. End quote. Elsa had a complicated relationship with love. Her parents never loved her. Instead of treating her like she should have been treated, they treated her like the ugly stepsister. She loved her husband, but it was not really a happy marriage. Her mother and father in law loved Elsa like a daughter, but they also had responsibility for their farm. Jack was able to give Elsa the most pure form of love that she'd ever had. He empowered her until her last moments. It was Elsa's love for Jack that inspired her, but most importantly, her love for her children. She knew she was stuck in the life she was leading, and she didn't want her children to be stuck in that life too. So she was willing to fight with everything she had to give them a better life. And she paid the ultimate price for that freedom. There are many powerful lessons of love that we were able to see in the novel. And each type of love teaches us about the different types of love we have in our life. And even though Elsa was not able to have unconditional love, she didn't give up on it. She gave it to her children and was able to find romantic love by the end of the novel. Just beautiful. The next topic this book covers is classism. Elsa starts this book as the daughter of a rich business owner. Because of this, Elsa was educated and privileged. However, after getting pregnant, she has to leave that life of luxury and go work on a farm. The Martinellis were not impoverished, but like many immigrants, they had to work for everything in life. Being with the Martinellis was not Elsa's dream, but it taught her the value of hard work. And for the first time in her life, Elsa had purpose. Then, Elsa had to take her family across the country when they had little to nothing. For the first time in her life, Elsa was impoverished and had to work grueling hours for little pay. After working in California a while, Elsa finds a spot on a plantation where she's essentially a slave. She describes the conditions as such. Poverty is such a soul crushing thing, a cave that tightened around you, its pinprick of light closing a little more at the end of each desperate, unchanged day. End quote. However, because of Elsa's upbringing and her love of learning, Elsa keeps her kids from working. She works hard to send them to school and even becomes part of the PTA to make sure that her kids and the other Okie children have a voice. Although she's treated poorly by the other women in the PTA, her being there for her children was so important, and she was an example to her children of the importance of education. Her standing up for her kids was one of my favorite parts of the book. That could be because I'm a teacher and I know the importance of education and how life changing it could be. But it also was a good reminder of how I treat other people. It's easy to treat a person by how they dress or how much money they have, but that's not what truly is important about a person. Here's a quote that stood out to me about class. She worked like a dog to support us, doing whatever she had to do, but each night at bedtime, she kissed me goodnight and told me that I could be anything in America. It was a dream that had brought her here and passed it on to me, but it was a lie. For people like us, anyways. Folks who are from the wrong place, or have the wrong skin color, or speak the wrong language, or pray to the wrong God. End quote. I believe this was Elsa's mother in law who said this, but it captures an important idea in the novel. It's very difficult for people to escape the poverty gap in this country. In fact, 90% of women born in poverty have children in poverty as well. I worked for 6 years at a Title I school, and I saw this with my own eyes. Parents who fought for their kids to go to school and work hard had kids who were able to fight the cycle. But parents who were apathetic to education and their children dropped out because of it. Convincing a kid to live a lifestyle outside of the cycle is difficult. However, it does happen. That is one of the things that is great about this country, that we're given an opportunity to escape it, if given the right tools. However, this book reminded me that many people who are in poverty didn't choose poverty. They were dealt a poor hand and they need help. It's not wrong to need help, but people need hope to get out of the cycle. We saw that hope time and time again with people like Jack and the good people in town who helped Elsa and her family by giving them food, haircuts, and anything else they needed. Basically, by being good people. It was a good reminder to me to treat people well because you never know what landed them in their current life circumstance. The Four Winds is my favorite Kristin Hannah book, and it gets a 5 out of 5 stars for me. My favorite part of Kristin Hannah is not only does she do hours of research to create an authentic story, but the authentic characters that she creates in those times. Elsa and Loretta are like many other mothers and daughters. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you like this episode, make sure to give it a thumbs up or leave a comment. If you're listening to the podcast, please give it a review. These take a second for you, but mean so much to me. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This will let you know when I post a new episode and is 100% free to you. If you want to keep up with my current reads, you can follow me on Instagram or Goodreads. The links are posted in the video below, or you can find me by searching According to Your English Teacher. Also, I'd love to hear your feedback through an email. So if you'd love to shoot me an email, my email is atyet or atyet33@gmail.com. I'd like to leave you with one last quote. It wasn't the fear that mattered in life. It was the choices made when you were afraid. You were brave because of your fear, not in spite of it. Thanks again for listening to this episode of According to Your English Teacher. This episode was written by me, Sam Gunther, and edited by Dalla Gunther. The music was done by Tom Brinton. Please join us next week as we discuss The Nightingale. Thanks for listening and happy reading.